Oftentimes, you're the only person trying to do something different in an environment that is literally built to resist change. And students want it. Students are rushing to the AI classes and the technology classes and the leadership development classes because there's nothing like it in law school. And so there is a huge, huge demand for it. But I think there needs to be vision in the leadership at the law schools, as well as on the faculty, to realize that you've got doctrinal theoretical courses at the base of legal education. You then move into application and experiential learning. And then you move to leadership, which is effectiveness training. It doesn't replace the doctrinal theory that you must know. It doesn't replace the application within clinical work, but it does take you to that final level of how do I become an effective leader within whatever path I'm going.
Today on LawNext, Anastasia Boyko likes to say that she's Goldilocks-ed her way through her career. True, it's been a varied career as she's tried out different roles, but it's one that's taken her full circle, from Yale Law School, where she graduated, and then eventually back to Yale Law to create a program in leadership for lawyers, and from Salt Lake City, where she grew up, and then back to that city as Chief Innovation Officer at the University of Utah's S.J. Quinney College of Law. Along the way, she's learned a thing or two about leadership in law, innovation in law, and legal education, and she's my guest today to share some of her insights on those topics. This is Bob Ambrogi, and you're listening to LawNext, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. Before we get to my conversation with Anastasia, please take a moment to hear from the sponsors who so generously support this podcast. You didn't go to law school to waste time writing and responding to discovery requests. Never waste time on discovery again with BriefPoint. BriefPoint drafts your discovery responses and requests for documents within minutes of your first sign-in. BriefPoint is the most reliable discovery drafting solution on the market, and it works right out of the box. Get your first document drafted by going to briefpoint.ai and clicking Get Started. No credit card required. BriefPoint. Draft what matters, automate the rest. Running an immigration law firm requires cutting-edge technology that keeps pace with your practice. Lally Law delivers with over 40 predefined workflows, instant form updates, and multilingual client management. Access 125 USCIS, DOJ, and EOIR forms, all updated within an hour of release, while streamlining your entire case process from intake to completion. Transform your immigration practice with intelligent, comprehensive case management software. Visit lollylaw.com. That's LOLLYLAW.com. Now let's get to today's conversation. Anastasia Boyko, welcome to LawNext.
Thank you for having me.
Great to talk to you. And you are in Utah, right? You're in Salt Lake City still?
I am back home in Salt Lake.
Back home in Salt Lake, where you spent part of your earlier years and came back there. You in fact, first came to the United States as a refugee with your mother from Soviet Ukraine. How old were you when you did that, and what were the circumstances?
Yeah, I was 8 years old. It's sort of weird to, like, Salt Lake City is home in the sense that I grew up here, but I think having grown up in two different places, it's hard to identify home. So I was born in Donetsk, Ukraine. My grandparents were coal miners. My mom was the first to go to college and graduate school. And an opportunity came in 1989 to leave the country, and her best friend was leaving and said, "Come with us. We're going to America." And so she took a very courageous step to take her daughter to somewhere we had no contact. And they randomly placed us in Salt Lake City. So we arrived in Salt Lake City with 2 suitcases, no family, no money. Luckily, some great support from the government, from organizations here. But it was an adventure for sure.
Culture shock of a sort?
Yeah, and I think late stage communism compared to the theocracy that can sometimes be characterized as Utah. There were some similarities, but definitely culture shock in the sense that there was a different language, a different culture, and there wasn't a support system. So there were other refugees and immigrants here who came from the Soviet Union, but it was a very small population. And so trying to understand how this place works as an outsider, a double outsider, was really unique.
Yeah. Do you still have relatives and family in Ukraine, or?
Most of my immediate family passed a couple decades ago, but we have cousins, and so we've been keeping a close eye on this. We were going to go back in 2014. I haven't been back. My mom has come back once, and we were going to go back in 2014, and that's when the first invasion had started. I think a lot of folks were surprised by the violence of the second invasion in 22, and so that was really hard to deal with in the initial months, and I think a lot of folks have just sort of gotten used to, sadly, the day-to-day of war. But it is hard to watch a place that has such an important part in my life go through that, but also be far away from it and safe, right? Like, it's a
Yeah.
bizarre position to be in.
Yeah, yeah. I bet it's difficult. I think something that you and I have in common is that our careers have been varied and not necessarily straight lines, from point A to point B. So I'm curious, I wanna talk about a lot of aspects of that, and, about a lot of your thoughts on some of the areas that you've focused on in your career, but I'm kinda curious how you went from that 8-year-old to Yale Law School and then into a career in law. What brought you there?
Yeah, I was always an academic student. I really enjoyed school. I really enjoyed learning. I was very ambitious. I joke with my friends. I'm sort of like Tracy Flick in Election, just wanting to lead every organization. And so I went to a public high school that was highly under resourced, but luckily had a large number of advanced classes. And so I actually started at the University of Utah as a junior because I had so many credits. I did a double major there. I was very focused on law school since my teenage years. And I got into every single law school. My dream school at the time was Columbia. They gave me a full ride. I went to visit schools, and I went to Yale, and I fell in love. And I said, "Sure, right? I'll pay full price to go here." My parents were not happy with that choice, but it was the kind of thing where you felt a gut instinct to go a specific institution.
Whose parents are not happy with their child deciding to go to Yale Law School? What's that about?
The ones who wanted me to take the scholarship money, and
Okay, all right.
go to
Oh, okay,
Columbia.
okay.
So,
Wasn't like they wanted you to go to medical school or something, no?
no, they were fine. I think they were always very confused with my ambition and still sort of are. But I had a 60-year plan since I was a teenager. Year by year, I was gonna be, a big time lawyer, a senator. I wanted to be chief justice. I had done a Supreme Court internship in college and was very focused, sort of very specific, shiny, traditional Yale Law School path. And a lot of that changed once I got to law school.
Yeah. A 60 year plan, you said, right? That was not a
Mhm.
six-year plan.
Year by year.
That's pretty
Yeah.
ambitious. Good for you.
Yeah, I think a lot of us who go to law school or type A are a bit obsessed with controlling uncertainty, and so we overplan for the fact that life is actually very difficult to plan and control.
Yeah. I don't know that I was that way. I did go to law school, but I went to law school to advance my career in journalism, so I wasn't really thinking it through very well at the time. I don't think I
You were the
fully.
smart one. Yeah, we had a handful of folks at Yale Law, classmates who, were journalists and had come to get a legal education. I actually think it's a much more all-purpose kind of degree, and we don't market it in that way. We very much market it as a trade degree versus an all-purpose thinking degree.
Oh, I definitely agree, and I mean, that for me, that was really part of the reason. It was a journalism, advisor of mine who said, "If you wanna learn how the world works and write about how the world works, go to law school because nothing's gonna help you understand it
Nothing
better."
else. Yeah, it's the
But
best math.
but but it's, the tuition, is, a little costlier than, going and getting a degree in, I don't know, economics or something, or politics, or well, the 60-year plan, I guess, hasn't quite turned out as you had planned it, although it's certainly been interesting. You have had a long and varied career, and we don't probably have time in the course of this, interview to go through every step of it, but you did practice law, and then you moved from practicing law into some sort of business development roles, Thomson Reuters, and, a law firm, and eventually found your way back to Yale Law School, a number of years later, not quite 60 years later, but a number of years later. What was the course, of your career that brought you from law school into practice, into other areas of it, and then back to Yale?
Yeah, I think it does actually start in law school in the sense that I graduated college at 20. I graduated law school at 23. So I really didn't have enough life experience professionally to really understand what I liked working on. And so I believe like a lot of my career was iterating through the experience itself. And I don't think that I got much guidance. I know many law students don't think they get much guidance in law school about how to make decisions throughout their career. And so as I knew I wanted to go into a law firm. I was much more compelled toward private practice than I was toward government work or public interest work. And I didn't have crazy hours, but I wanted to work with people. And so I went into Wilson Trust and I went to a firm that had a really big trust and estates practice nationally. So I knew that would get me a lot more exposure to the different facets of estate planning. But then I found myself much more interested in the financial services side. So I went to corporate tax, mostly helping investment funds do international transactions, which I think was probably the beginning of where I found my interest in operations. Like I like how all the pieces fit together, and I was much more interested in how the firm operated. Why are we rewriting the same memo over and over? Why are our business development structures not particularly sophisticated? Why don't we train lawyers very well? Right, like all the things that young associates begin to get quick to within the first few months. And then we had a big reduction in force because we had a big tax department that was very busy, and then 2009 hit, and I had to make a choice. Do I go to another law firm and keep doing this thing that doesn't feel fully satisfying, or do I actually take a chance and give myself permission to figure out what I want to do? And I really just started exploring everything under the sun, from being a concierge at a big hotel to being an investment banker to maybe being a yoga teacher. And I started writing down all the things that I was interested in, things I liked doing in previous jobs, and using a lot of really great sort of leadership resources that figure out what you should do professionally. And then this interesting job came up at Practical Law, and it fit every single thing I was looking for as far as sort of autonomy, something entrepreneurial, doing something around lawyer training and enhancing the lawyer experience. Plus, it was in tech, and it was ideal and came at the perfect time. And so I took that role. And what was neat about that is I could really try out anything I wanted to try out. And so my job initially was to top up all the AmLaw 200 professional development teams to figure out how they're building training programs. And I learned, like firms are really complex and there is variance among all these firms, even though there are probably patterns about how they operate. And there are really big gaps about what is needed for the lawyer experience for them to be successful. I also then saw that our sales team could have used a little bit more training and sales enablement about how they spoke and sold to lawyers. Some of them were not lawyers. And so I was allowed to begin a sales enablement function. I was then asked to lead the marketing function. I was out and talking on issues of knowledge management, professional development, business operations. I was very lucky to have a platform to be able to do that and an organization that was agile enough for me to be able to step into different seats to try out what I liked and what I didn't like. And so I feel like many lawyers don't get the joy of that experience of iterating to see what fits and what doesn't fit in a very Goldilocks kind of manner.
You talked about Goldilocksing your way through your career. I saw an interview with you
Yeah.
somewhere where you talk about that.
Yeah, and so I think that was really interesting, and then once we were acquired by Thomson Reuters, I was much more interested in trying to apply the skills I had gotten to maybe a law firm context, and so, I had moved to Texas and gone to a very new AmLaw 100 law firm to see if I could do business development, marketing, practice management to try to, grow their transactional and international practices. And what was interesting is once I got in a law firm, on the back end, you see how much resistance there is to change in the system itself, right? So I think that there are some leaders who get very excited about change. We have a really big organization with individuals who have a lot of power, uh, separate from the internal management structure of the firm. And so actually moving change is very difficult within a professional services firm like a law firm. And I was missing New York, and so I moved back to New York and found a role at Axiom, which was fascinating because I'd never done real, true, like, recruiting talent development, but they wanted somebody to oversee their in-house lawyer recruiting and talent development engine and think about how do we make this a commercial function and not a traditional like, "Oh, are you happy with your work?" But, like, how does this all connect to the bigger growth of a flex talent team and how we service our clients. So I oversaw a group of almost 500 lawyers on different projects. I saw how the in-house environment works, which is super different. I saw the skill sets that it took to go from sophisticated, successful law firm lawyer to successful business lawyer within a law firm. And then I also learned how to manage a team for the first time. And that was very enriching, but very challenging to learn how to let go of control and delegate to people. And so that to me was sort of the 360 at how the legal services arc came along. And I had been involved in my law school's alumni initiatives. I was on the fund board. I'd gotten to know our deans. I'd been mentoring students for a long time. And we had a new dean come in 2017, and I had gotten to know her. And we sat down, and she was talking about building a leadership program. And I said, "Great. I've been around the lawyer talent sphere from a lot of different perspectives. If I can be a resource, please let me know." And she said, "Actually, I'd like you to build it. I want you to move here. You've got no budget, no blueprint, no team. Good luck. We're going to need to raise a 9-figure endowment and build a blueprint for how we make better leaders. I have an institution that is known for producing a lot of leaders across many different industries and sectors and roles."
Yeah. So that got you back to Yale in 2019, and you were at Yale for a couple of years, and then went back to Salt Lake City. I want to talk more about what you're doing at Yale, but just to kind of bring us to where you are now, so that people kind of understand the context of your career, because it comes together in some shared themes that are really relevant, I think, to a lot of legal professionals and people in both in law practice and in legal education. So why don't you kind of bring us up to date to
Yeah.
Yale, and then where you went
So
from there, and then we can talk more about.
I wrapped up my work at Yale, and I came back to New York City, and like nothing felt right. Like I tried a bunch of different jobs, but like I felt like my time in New York was over, even though I'd spent 2 decades on the East Coast, and New York City was very much home for my adult self. And I missed my family. I missed the mountains. And so I said, you know what? I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna go home, and I'm gonna reconnect with my parents, who I used to see once or twice a year, and I'm gonna see what's happening here for this next chapter. And I came back, and everyone sort of pushed me toward getting to know the dean of S.J. Quinney Law School, it's Elizabeth Cronk Warner. And I thought, I don't want to go back to academia. I'm an entrepreneur. I like to build things. I'm not sure I want to be back in that container again. But I absolutely adored her. We had a wonderful meeting, and she said, I'd like you to lead a number of different things. One, we have a master's program that's aimed at mid-career professionals. I'd like you to look at that and see how we can improve it and grow it. I want you to think about non-curricular offerings that a law school could do, micro credentials, sort of short classes that other folks who aren't trying to get a law degree would benefit from. And then I want you to think about innovation in the context of technology. Utah is the third largest tech hub in the country, and innovation in the context of access to justice. And so I had come in, I had overseen the master's program, and I moved into a chief innovation role, trying to think about how do we build an innovation center to be able to harness both the private sector tech innovation as well as the access to justice opportunities. And in a much broader scape, right? I think oftentimes we think about it in a narrow context, but what if I could take undergrads who are thinking about societal impact, who are thinking law school is the only way to do that, who could come into our ecosystem and use the resources that exist at our amazing entrepreneurship program at the business school, as well as the parts happening at the law school, to find a way to make an impact sooner without necessarily going to law school. They might end up going to law school. But this is just sort of a bigger full circle way of looking at impact and change. Where at Yale, right, like I was spoken this thing at 200 students a year, very small scale. You could argue bigger impact depending on the kinds of roles that they end up taking. But then coming full circle and thinking about access to justice and innovation and the legal ecosystem and how it impacts community and social growth.
But did you, I mean, even thinking about teaching leadership in a law school is an innovative approach to teaching a law student. And did you think of it that way? I mean, what about your career kind of prepared you to be leading a program in leadership at Yale Law School? What did you take from your career that you could bring to that program?
Yeah, I think I worked with a lot of lawyers. I had this gift of being able to be into this position where I interact with a lot of law firms and lawyers and people who support lawyers, who were lawyers, People who are thinking about how I evaluate performance, how I think about trajectory and leadership development. So because I got to see that ecosystem really close up from the law firm perspective, from the in-house perspective, from the business operations perspective, and also having coached a lot of law students, I began to see patterns. And so when I came to YLS, I wanted to make sure that the assumptions were correct. And so I embedded myself back into the law school ecosystem and got to see how the students were interacting with the law school and the law school resources and what was the same, what was different, how did that compare to what I was hearing from people at other law schools. And simultaneously, I was talking to alumni and asking them, like, what was your experience like? Like, what was missing? What was wonderful? What do we want to make sure that we keep? What do we want to make sure that we enhance? The same themes kept coming up, right? I think there was a real desire for more financial literacy, which is something that we are very much scared of. There was a desire for more professional skills that
We don't go to law
traditionally
school
live.
for math, as everybody jokes.
Right, as if math is, like, harder than legal reasoning. And secondarily, thinking about professional skills, things that generally live in management programs that really should be available to law students and enhance the way that law students operate in teams and learn to be effective advocates for whatever they're trying to do. And the third piece was really around career pathing. A lot of people told me, "I just really didn't know what I was doing, and I couldn't really differentiate among the paths available to me." So there are huge opportunities to be able to create much more bespoke mentorship opportunities, opportunities to be able to give students time at the end of their law school experience to think about ethical decision making if you're going to go in-house or if you're going to go into the nonprofit sector, right? Like really connecting what the future looks like, the bridge to your first professional job outside of law school, and creating real strong networks to be able to lean on as you're navigating through that kind of path.
Yeah. So, how do you go about teaching law students to be leaders?
Yeah, I think it's those fundamental pieces, right? It's the skills pieces. So I think when we look at hard skills, it is the financial literacy classes, getting accounting and corporate finance into
Just
regular
business skills, basic
offerings.
business skills
Yeah,
is what it comes
put
down.
those
Yeah.
in there as an offering. I think that's super important. I think adding layers of management skills around how to negotiation, how to give feedback, and things that you could actually embed into parts of law school. So imagine you're going to an experiential learning clinical course doing a workshop around how to give and receive feedback and how to work effectively in teams, that's a good time to do that, right? To do with the clinical students. And so I think those practical pieces are really relevant. I decided to launch a leadership class because we were thinking about how we teach leadership competencies, so things around integrity and vision and emotional intelligence. And I would talk to a group of students who said, "Let's do this for credit." My dean said, "Sure, run it." And so we launched it as an experiential, kind of experimental course during COVID, and we had done it on Zoom. And I thought, you know what? Let's bring in a bunch of VIP alums to talk about their leadership trajectories. How did you get from point A to point B? Where were the challenges? How do you think about managing a team? How do you deal with failure? What can you tell your former law school self? And it was fantastic because these are like off the record conversations with big deal people who otherwise you'd see in a lecture hall and they'd get canned questions. You'd spend 45 minutes talking about their resume, but you never really got into the meat of it. And so we did these as interviews that everybody got the same number of questions. Students would watch that interview beforehand, and then we dive into a session where the students could ask whatever they wanted. And it became a really robust conversation, especially with people who would give us resources that they'd come up with that were super helpful that the students themselves could use. And then the students would have workshops in between those sessions where they would go through those sets of questions they were just asking. And at the very end, they would record their own little mini interview about what they would like their leadership journey to look like. And I wasn't sure how this was going to go, but the feedback was exceptional. Students said it was the best class they took in law school. They said it was the most connected they felt to their classmates. It was a way for them to see each other as a human. We hear a lot of feedback about students feeling like being surveilled with their classmates, that they're competing really sharply. Like we forget to see each other as these interesting beings who we can learn from and lean on. And so I think if you create psychological safety, right, which is what all of the Google studies have said during their people operations teams, you are able to then connect with people. And we see this in law schools and the ecosystems and the cultures in law schools where there's a lot of, it's not necessarily combative, but there's fear and folks don't necessarily trust each other sometimes in certain cultures at law schools. And so I think there's an opportunity to build psychological safety and teach leadership competencies in this way that hit at a lot of the concerns and challenges of the current legal education ecosystem.
My impression is, and you can tell me if I'm right, but that this is not something that most law schools are teaching. And if that's correct, why aren't they? And should they be?
I think most law schools are not teaching it because it's hard to teach, right? I think I got lucky to be able to facilitate something like this because I had that 360 perspective. I had the ability to see the professional paths the students would encounter. I also have spent a lot of time in talent management and talent development. And so I know how to hold those spaces because I've seen different iterations of them in my career. Oftentimes, when you're hiring people to teach courses, especially if they're tenured faculty, they spend a lot of time in like a specific kind of pedagogy and a specific kind of scholarship. And I think that focus can sometimes not give you the benefit of seeing the full holistic picture of how to approach this. There's also the challenge of convincing faculty to want to have courses like this, to take courses like this seriously. And every school is different as far as what their gaps are to be able to fill the leadership vacuum that I think many of them want to fill. I'll tell you, after I left Yale, I really wanted to talk to other people leading innovation initiatives at law schools. And so I began to sort of build this group of people who had done something different within law schools and then decided to start a little gang called the Legal Change Gang, where we talk once a month on a Zoom. And they're folks who are doing either tech or well-being or any other kind of leadership change or curriculum change within the traditional ecosystem. And it's nice because we all face the same challenges. Oftentimes, you're the only person trying to do something different in an environment that is literally built to resist change. And students want it. Students are rushing to the AI classes and the technology classes and the leadership development classes because there's nothing like it in law school. And so there is a huge, huge demand for it. But I think there needs to be vision in the leadership at the law schools, as well as on the faculty, to realize that you've got doctrinal theoretical courses at the base of legal education. You then move into application and experiential learning. And then you move to leadership, which is effectiveness training. It doesn't replace the doctrinal theory that you must know. It doesn't replace the application within clinical work, but it does take you to that final level of how do I become an effective leader within whatever path I'm going. And that's not really a rubric within which we've seen legal education. Although we know how important leadership development is, given the roles that lawyers take on in their communities once they leave law schools.
Yeah.
One reason more law schools aren't teaching leadership, as you heard Boyko say, is that it's hard to teach. But it's also true, as you also heard Boyko say, that law schools are often resistant to change and therefore resistant to adopting innovative programs and courses. Why is that? Well, the answer, Boyko believes, is complicated. We'll hear what she thinks about that in just a moment. But first, please take this opportunity to learn about the sponsors who so generously support this podcast. Think about all the time-intensive tasks slowing down your immigration practice. Hunting for updated forms, translating documents, chasing payments, and managing workflows. LawLaw's immigration case management software automates these pain points away, with government forms updated within an hour of release, more than 40 customizable workflows, and instant payment processing in over 20 languages. See the difference by visiting lollylaw.com. That's LOLLYLAW.com. Anastasia Boyko's Goldilocks-ed career has taken her from law school to law practice and then through a variety of jobs before bringing her back into academia, first at Yale, where she developed and oversaw a program on leadership, and then at the University of Utah's S.J. Quinney College of Law, where she was Chief Innovation Officer. As we return to our conversation, we talk more about why law schools are slow to innovate and explore what it even means for a law school to innovate. We also talk about the role of a law school in advancing access to justice. Let's get back to that conversation.
I have been to a couple of conferences over the last couple of years that have been primarily legal educators. The SubTech conference in Chicago is the most recent. I don't know if you've ever been to that, but they are people working in a law school environment to push tech and innovation programs of one sort or another. I heard a lot of what you were just saying, which is that there is a lot of resistance even within their schools, even within schools that have innovation programs of some sort, or at least innovative people on their faculties, to providing support and encouragement for those kinds of programs. Is it just that law schools are so entrenched in sort of their ancient ways of teaching law, or is there something else going on there in terms of why they are so reluctant to kind of adopt these kinds of programs?
Yeah, they're complex ecosystems, as I learned. Even though I had volunteered a lot and I had been in touch with people within the law school world, I didn't know what it was until I got into it. And so I think for a lot of folks, understanding that culture, that very entrenched, traditional, we've always done it a specific way kind of culture, is not only in the way that we teach law, it's the way that we operate these institutions. And so you have to think about, like, what do you need to be successful as a law school? Resources, oftentimes, right? So you're thinking about, what does your budget look like? How many faculty can you hire? Can you compete for those faculty based on where you are ranked? What kind of students can you recruit? That's also based on a lot of the factors that are within U.S. News and outside of U.S. News, and trying to build an ecosystem like that can facilitate both growth or keeping your position within a particular kind of set of rankings requires an ecosystem that keeps that going and certain functions that keep that going. And so when you come in and say, well, let's add a bunch of different courses, well, that needs course support. That needs potentially a class. That needs some, I've already started to put it in. That requires enrollment. How many credits is it going to be? How do we get the faculty to approve an adjunct to be able to do this? If you're an adjunct coming in to do this, you're going to have to do this all yourself. You may or may not get faculty support to put together your course and deliver it. And facilitating guest speakers. What does that even look like if they're coming on campus? Who's going to help you with those pieces? So there are a lot of just little tactical pieces that I think we ignore when we think about building a law school curriculum. So if you're going to look at a school like Yale, when I came in, had 160 classes a year. That's a lot of classes being offered for roughly 200 students per class. And so when you're adding more and more classes, you're thinking about, what is the operational load of having all of those classes offered? How few students can you have and still keep a class going? How are you thinking about the budget that it would cost to bring in adjuncts? How much more expensive than others? Like when we were building our program, I realized how much management school faculty were getting paid and what I would need to pay for them to come and be visitors to teach certain classes. And then you need to manage sort of the general perspective of your faculty about what direction they want to go to as far as innovation. Many faculty are happy to stay with the traditional model of teaching because, again, like I said, their focus has been on their scholarship and the way they've always taught things before. Many faculty I talk to aren't as aware of what's happening, not just in the legal practice ecosystem, but even the AI innovation world. Those things are all just out in the clouds for some folks. So how do you convince those people that it's important? You can keep explaining conceptually why it's important, but it's very hard to get them to your page quickly.
So part of it sounds like, is an established mindset, but part of it is just come down to logistics and bureaucracy and factors like that.
And budgets,
And budget,
right?
right.
I think people don't realize just how tight some budgets are at different law schools because you're thinking about your operating budget depending on where it's coming from. You're oftentimes working off of the interest of your endowment, and then you've got your leadership trying to raise more money for different initiatives. And so faculty salaries are expensive, benefits on top of that are expensive, staff salaries and benefits are expensive. The building itself and updating the building, right? You're thinking through what the line items look like. And at the end of the day, law schools are actually pretty expensive to operate a lot of the time because of the headcount cost.
So you became chief innovation officer at a law school. So how did you work to bring innovation to the law school? How did you work to overcome those kinds of obstacles that are present in a law school environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think change management has always been an interesting question for me because I've been in environments where we're trying to change behavior, and law schools being like to me most static environment that I've been in, trying to change that. I think you find allies and people who are interested, whether they're people on your faculty or among your student body. I find that student groups are fantastic allies when you're trying to build change management projects because they're eager and interested in these ideas, and they can actually push for these initiatives with faculty and with administration to build more and more buy-in. I also think it's super important to find allies across a university. One of the first things I did at Yale and something I did at the University of Utah was find other departments that are doing innovation. So we got a business school that's a top-ranked entrepreneurship school. We got a leadership program at the entrepreneurship school, at the business school. And we have all of these allies across the university who are interested in what we are building. And that was very true for Yale as well. So once you start building a coalition and getting a sense of where are the resources, where are students going, how do we get it momentum behind something like this, both within the university ecosystem and then now move on to the alumni population, then move on to stakeholders within your local city and state communities who are interested in these ideas. And you build this like lattice network of change makers, and that makes it a little bit easier as you're building something if maybe you get resistance in one pocket of this ecosystem or another.
Yeah. What was it that you wanted to build? I mean, what does innovation look like to you within a law school environment? What was it that you would like to see come about?
Yeah, to me, I was looking at it as a clearinghouse for change makers. Like, I wanted to create a hub for people to come with ideas to try to make those ideas possible. And so I would have loved to create something where we could partner with our entrepreneurship school, where we could host hackathons about different social impact ideas, where we could have a lab where we could play around with different AI and technology tools, where students' ideas would get, oxygen and resources to be able to do. So I think oftentimes, especially imagine the first year of law school, you begin to see how limited law is as a tool of change. And so instead of getting more and more depressed about what you can do within the law, maybe take your idea and go within an innovation center and see who else is thinking about some of these issues to see if you can build a solution. That might be an app, right? Like something as simple as, you're thinking about housing affordability and you're thinking about tenants' rights. And you're thinking, could I build an app for them to see what their rights are within our state and how to be more proactive about it? Sure, right? Because what I learned when I was a practical law is like law is know how. It's learning how to do something. And so it's more information than it is this complex magical thing that you don't get to know until you go through these 3 years. And so to the extent that we can start giving people access to information about how the rules that govern their lives work, the better off we are. And we can do this over and over again. And you don't have to be like, I think it touches everybody. Oftentimes we're thinking about access to justice for really vulnerable populations who need shelter, food, access to jobs, very, very at the spectrum of it. I'm thinking about everybody else in between. We're talking about a 92% access to justice gap. And I'm thinking about everyone who needs to write a will, anyone who is trying to create a company. I wouldn't know how to put together a company. I'd have to go to somebody who does formation all of the time. What if I could do some sort of service or an app that explains to me how I would put together a specific corporation here, why I would make it a specific structure? Do I look at a different state? What do I need to have as far as a checking account and a registered agent? They're just basic little things like that that seem very complicated, that scare people off, but that can be a really necessary part about how we grow our communities, both economically and socially.
So then innovation is about providing the atmosphere that enables people to pursue a vision of change.
Yeah, innovation to me is pretty simple. It's doing something different to get a better result. And oftentimes I think lawyers think about innovation and they immediately rush to the idea of tech. And I think that's why tech has been in some ways a red herring for people because they want to press the easy button. And I was like, no, like innovation is changing the way that you've been operating for decades, but actually hasn't been that effective, right? Lawyers are miserable. The research and the surveys belie a population of really smart, powerful, effective people who could effectuate positive change who are not happy in the way that they're doing their work. And so, even just that shift, like, how do we change the way that lawyers deliver legal services to make them more happy and less stressed? That itself would have massive innovation. Because think of the things that you could do if you were less stressed and weren't working on things that took up a lot of time that probably aren't the best use of your strategic kind of big thinking kind of skills.
Yeah. There are some law schools in this country that have established themselves as innovative, as encouraging programs that promote innovation. But I'm sure there are probably lots of others, and I've actually heard law school professors say this from time to time, that it's not the role of a law school to address the access to justice crisis. Say, it's the role of a law school is to prepare lawyers to practice law. And what do you say to that? I mean, what is the responsibility of law schools to address this issue?
I love that question because the responsibility of law schools, the answer is always going to be who you're asking. And so the faculty are always going to have a very specific view of what the role of law schools is because of what they deliver as faculty, right? So they're going to have a much more scholarly, theoretical approach to what it is that they're doing. And that's great, right? Like that is their role and that is their perspective. And employers are going to have very different answers. And then law students are going to have very different answers as our associates. So, like, I don't love asking that question. I think any kind of education is there to be used by the person who's engaging in it. To at the beginning of our conversation, right? Like, you use this degree for a specific purpose. I came with a specific idea about what I wanted to use it for, and then sort of adjusted it to what I needed it to be over time. And so it's going to be different for everybody depending on what your financial needs are, what your career objectives are. Your career objectives will change during the time of law school. There are a lot of things that you can take advantage of during law school that many of us didn't know existed as far as being able to get the kinds of skills that we need. There are law schools that have exceptionally innovative programs where there are students who have no idea those programs exist,
Mhm.
where they've heard of them and they've never taken advantage of them. That doesn't mean that there aren't amazing tools, that there aren't students who have been able to get a lot out of a law school experience that their classmates didn't get. But it's just so variable depending on who you're asking, what their experience is. And I don't think any of us are ever going to come to one concise answer about what law school should be. I look at law school as an all purpose thinking degree. It's a problem degree, a problem solving degree. It teaches you how to think logically and how to communicate effectively. And so when we look at it, like the master's program that we have at the U, there are many master's programs that are now developing across law schools. They are meant to service folks who are maybe interested in law school, folks who are mid career, who might be in compliance or HR, who would really benefit from a legal studies foundation. But what we teach them is how to think logically and how to communicate effectively. Every single employer wants that from their students. And so I think we get lost in the weeds when we start looking at a JD program and start talking about, well, what is it? Is it trade school? Is it meant to get you to be a specific kind of lawyer? What if you're not a lawyer? Was it a waste of time? We could waste hours talking about these things, but it's so specific to the individual and how they want to navigate that experience, and important for us to be able to communicate that to students as they're thinking about the choice and the options in front of them from a graduate school perspective.
Yeah. What about the student's perspective? I mean, you said earlier in our conversation that students were flocking to innovation programs, flocking to leadership programs. But I know that I've talked to some deans who have said kind of the opposite of what you just said. We've got innovation programs. We're wanting the students to sign up for them, but they're not signing up for them because they're worried about doing what they need to do to get that big law firm associate job, and they don't see this as relevant to that. What about that? What's your take on that?
I think one of the biggest misses in legal education is we don't do a very good job of explaining to students how to navigate their legal education and how what is available in law school comes together. Like, how do the different pieces come together? What should you take advantage of? How should you think about choosing classes? And it is partially a choose your own adventure. But there are probably some guide points depending on what you're interested in about what you should take and when you should take it. And so I think in oftentimes What I've observed in the law schools that I've been in and talking to colleagues at other law schools is oftentimes a problem will present itself in the form of a complaint from a student group or a complaint from alums or employers. And the response from the law school is, let's fix that symptomatic problem versus pulling up and asking, like, what are they actually asking? And is there a solution that we could make that could come at the beginning stages of the process of what we are doing? Right. So, something like we want more innovation and technology classes. Great. How can we help our students understand where technology and innovation fits into the ecosystem of legal services delivery and legal education so that they are interested in engaging with that? How does it fit into the suite of skills that they're trying to learn? Right. And students may still opt out. That's the beauty of choice. There are only a handful of classes that you can make required, which is why I think like Yale is such a fun ecosystem because you have one semester of required classes and then you get to decide among all these classes. And you may choose a class that's not a doctrinal class. I've heard lots of faculty be upset that doctrinal classes aren't being chosen. Well, there are more interesting classes to students and they might vote with their feet and go take those classes. I don't think it necessarily has meaning in that sense, but I do think it behooves faculty and administration to explain to students how the doctrinal classes fit in with the experiential classes, with the sort of the other category, right? The innovation, the technology, the well-being, all of those different pieces. We don't do that often enough. I think sometimes we'll touch on it during orientation, but I think if we were all on the same page about how those pieces fit together and the importance of each of those pieces and how they enhance one another, I think students would be much more confident in being able to make those choices and realizing why they're important. And you still aren't gonna get every student to take those classes unless you make them required.
Yeah. You mentioned the master's in legal studies program, and you were, as you said earlier, the director of non-J.D. programs for a while. How can we think about enhancing access to justice by using people who are not lawyers, and how does your work kind of fit into that? I mean, there was just a development just shortly before we're talking where another state is now setting up a program to allow licensing of entities that are not owned by legal professionals to deliver legal services. What is the role of people who do not have a formal law degree in enhancing legal services and enhancing access to justice?
Yeah, and kudos to our Supreme Court for creating the sandbox 4 years ago to think about exactly this issue. The Utah Supreme Court saw that there was a real need and not enough ability by the judiciary to solve all of these problems, and said, let's set up a sandbox where we can think about how non-lawyers can help partner in solving these issues, right? And so an example case as we think about domestic violence, there are a number of people who help guide citizens through the domestic violence process. And they don't necessarily need to be lawyers, especially if they're people who have guided people through this process for 2 decades. They know a lot more about this process than a brand new minted lawyer who's never worked on these cases before. So we have a recent entrant into the sandbox that is looking at community advocates who have those skill sets, who are trained in that kind of way, who are not lawyers, but who are able to help people through the court system in these processes in certain instances, right? And the courts have allowed them to operate in the court system within these instances because they do have that know how. They've been trained. They're able to help more people on these kinds of topics. And so more solutions like that are super useful. A technology startup called Rasa Legal is another great example, which is a fantastic app focused on expungement, very low cost expungement help for people to be able to navigate that process and be able to have more access to jobs and just better participation in their communities after they serve their time. So there are a lot of opportunities to think about the interaction that people are having with the justice system and whether a lawyer or a legally trained non-lawyer can help in those instances. So we've also have an LPP program in Utah, a licensed paralegal practitioner program, where these paralegals are able to get certified through education and practice hours to help in certain cases of debtor, bankruptcy issues, family law, to step in and help on certain parts of legal matters that are low cost, right? But still need sophisticated advising. And so I think that's one way to think about what are the kinds of daily interactions that people are having with the justice system where a lot of access to legal advice is impossible for them because it's too expensive? Can we create low bono options or non-lawyer legal services providers who are helping navigate that system, who aren't necessarily providing legal advice per se?
We're sort of getting low on time here, so I want to turn to a little bit of a crystal ball question, I guess, in terms of what you're seeing. What trends are you seeing, or have you been seeing in legal education, in legal practice, that you think are really going to gain momentum toward driving innovation in the coming years? What do we have to be hopeful for in legal education and legal practice?
I love AI labs. I think what's happening at Vanderbilt, that Cat Moon is leading, is fantastic. I love what Dennis Kennedy was doing at Michigan with his AI classes. I think more and more people starting cool, practical AI courses or labs are getting students engaged, potentially their faculty partners engaged, and something that is an open source kind of thing where they're sharing it on LinkedIn and other people can learn from it. In the law, we love to do what other people have done. We feel safer doing it. So I love the idea of sharing the actual blueprints of these things with other folks for them to lean on. Interesting approaches to bringing alumni and law firm professional partners in to help do courses that are cross functional, that literally bridge the gap right in law school by bringing practitioners in to help on certain courses and skill development, whether they're for credit or not. On the law firm side, I am loving all of these innovation departments. Law firms investing real money into sophisticated subject matter experts who are helping them do real practice innovation and build use cases, not just invest in this very expensive technology, but think about what kinds of teams of people need to exist within law firm ecosystems to change behavior and to slowly help lawyers adopt these technologies. Those are the folks who are going to be leading the pack as far as being highly profitable, being far less stressed, being way more impactful, creating partnerships with their clients. That is really, really exciting stuff. And I love seeing both small, medium, and large firms trying to implement those kinds of projects.
I love it. What about for you? What is the next in your Goldilocks career? What's the next chair you're going to sit in, or bed you're going to sleep in, or whatever the analogy would be?
I don't know. I don't know. It's interesting. I'm excited to go back into the private sector. I think I've seen a lot on the academic side, but I'm far more energized being in a high growth environment, whether that's with a legal tech or innovation company, or that's doing some sort of practice innovation in a law firm, or doing some sort of consulting on change management projects. So for me, it's in that kind of implementation, get in the weeds, try to build this thing as we move toward a brand new world. That's super exciting. And I think having seen the entire ecosystem helps me approach it with a much more holistic patient perspective while also driving results.
And you're going to keep teaching yoga too, right? You do that still?
I do. I do. I started doing yoga at my third year of law school. I got certified almost 10 years ago. And I think it's been the most helpful part of my career. And in fact, has informed how I think about leadership development, because so much of yoga is understanding yourself and getting clearer and comfortable with yourself so that you can hold space and lead others and show up to be less reactive. We forget that we have an emotional body when we're lawyers and we're in our heads, but your body holds a lot more wisdom than you realize. So I encourage everybody to find some sort of intentional movement in their life outside of their cognitive productivity brain.
That could be a whole nother episode of this podcast. Well, Anastasia, thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
I loved it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to share your own thoughts or comments, please do so by messaging us on LinkedIn or other social media, or by emailing me directly, ambrogi@gmail.com. And if you're a fan of LawNext, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. LawNext is a production of LawNext Media. I'm your host, Bob Ambrogi. I hope you join us again next time for another episode of LawNext.